Hello, my lovely PowerCats, and welcome back to Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, Part 9. Sorry if my voice sounds weird, I just got back from improv auditions, so that's gonna be fun. So, where we left off, we are starting a new chapter called The Gods of Battle. Okay. Odin, Lord of Hosts. Violence and battle were always close at hand in the lives of the men of the heathen period in northwestern Europe. It seems fitting then to begin our survey of the beliefs of the North by concentrating on the gods to whom they turned for help and the hazards of chance of warfare. In the late heathen period, there is no doubt as to the main figure who represented the god of battle, for Odin appears continually as the lord of hosts and giver of victory. In Snorri's account and in many poems, he is shown welcoming to his abode courageous men who fell in battle. His creatures were the raven and the wolf, who feast upon the slain, while his dwelling was the hall of the slain, Valhalla. In Norwegian court poetry of the 10th century, he is pictured choosing champions to fall in battle, so that after death they can be enrolled in his warrior band, and help him to go out to the last battle of the gods, with a magnificent following. This impressive conception has caught the imagination of late writers, and it is sometimes assumed that all men hoped to go to Valhalla after death. The literature, however, gives us no real reason to assume that Valhalla was ever regarded as a paradise for all. It was peopled by the chosen ones, the aristocratic warriors who had worshipped the god on earth. Those who joined Odin in Valhalla were princely warriors, kings, and distinguished leaders and heroes, who followed the god in life and pledged him their loyal service in return for his help. In the speech of the warrior Bjarki, as quoted by Saxo, it is clearly Odin who is referred to when he says, "War springs from the nobly born. Famous pedigrees are the makers of war. For the perilous deeds which chiefs attempt are not to be done by the ventures of common men. No dim and lowly race, no low-born, dead, no base souls are Pluto's prey. But he weaves the dooms of the mighty, and fills Phlegion with noble shapes." Like any earthly ruler, Odin handed out weapons to his chosen followers, and once they had received them, they were bound to give him loyal service till death and beyond it. Thus Sigmund the Volsung received a splendid sword, which the god himself brought into the hall and thrust into the great tree supporting the roof. The sword was regarded both as a family heirloom and a gift from Odin. And when Sigmund's time came to die, Odin appeared on the battlefield and shattered the blade with his spear. Pieces of the broken sword were reforged for Sigmund's son, Sigurd, who also found favor with Odin. He was given a wonderful horse bred from Odin's own steed, Sleipnir. Not only treasures, but valuable counsel might be given to the chosen warriors. Odin taught Sigmund spells of battle, and he introduced Hatting, another of his heroes, how to draw up his forces in wedge formation. When Hatting profited by this advice and led out his army, Odin himself, in the form of an old man, stood behind them, and shot so swiftly with his bow that 10 arrows sped as one, while he drove away the storm clouds which the enemy had raised by magic. Similarly, he gave advice to Harald the Wartooth, king of the Danes, to whom he appeared as an old man of great height, lacking one eye and clad in a hairy mantle. He promised Harald immunity from wounds, and in return Harald vowed to give him all the souls which his sword cast out of their bodies. Saxo has also preserved in the 8th book of his history of the story of what happened to Harald when the god's favor was withdrawn. First, Odin roused up enmity between him and his great friend King Ring, and then he gave to Ring the cherished secret of wedge formation. As Harald drove out to meet Ring in battle, he suddenly recognized the god in the place of his own charioteer. He begged him for one more victory, swearing to dedicate to Odin all who fell in battle. But the driver was relentless. Even as Harald pleaded, he flung him down from the chariot and slew him with his own sword as he fell. The bitterness against the god expressed in this story might be attributed to Saxo as the Christian scholar, if it stood alone, but it can be matched with many other sources. A fine 10th century poem, composed at the death of Hakon the Good of Norway, describes him entering the courts of Odin. He is received with much honor, but his response is a cold one. Surely we have deserved victory of the gods. Odin has shown great enmity towards us. We will keep our war gear ready to hand. The implication is clear. Odin cannot be trusted. This is expressed with even greater freedom in later poetry and by the prose writers. You have never been able to order the course of war. Often have you given victory to cowards who do not deserve it. Baldur's father has broken faith. It is unsafe to trust him. From Ketil's Saga. I suspect, indeed, that it is Odin who comes against us here, the foul and untrue. Hrolf's Saga, Kraka. Phrases such as this suggest widespread indignation against the treachery of the god. Perhaps it is not too fanciful to catch the same note in the protests of a high priest of the gods at the court of King Edwin of Northumbria in the 7th century. Recorded by Bede in his Ecclesial History of the English Nation, pages 11 through 13. Less than a century later, Ceolfi, the priest, declared that the old religion offered no reward for true and faithful service, and another unnamed speaker in the debate added that heathen men were left with nothing which they could trust once the earthly life was over. It seems likely that Ceolfi, the priest, was the servant of the god of battle, since his method of destroying and repudiating the temple of the gods was to hurl a spear at it, and then commit it to flames. This is in accordance with what we know of the sacrificial rites associated with Odin himself. In Old Norse literature, the rites said to belong to Odin are dedication by a spear, hanging and burning. Snorri tells us in Ynglinga Saga that the marking with a spear at the time of death and burning of the dead were practices followed by the Swedish worshippers of Odin, and that they claimed to be following their own god's example. According to the poem Havamal, Utterance of the High One, Odin himself recounts how he was pierced with a spear and hanged on a tree, a sacrifice for the attainment of wisdom. We have independent evidence for the sacrifice of men and beasts by hanging as late as the 11th century in Sweden. In his History of the Archbishops of Hamburg, Bremen, Adam of Bremen gives a grim picture of the bodies of men and animals left hanging from trees around the great heathen temple at Uppsala, when a special festival to the gods was held every 9 years. He gives as the source of his information a Christian friend of his, an old man of 72, who had told him that he had even seen those sacrifices hanging there. Whether this hanging was preceded by the stabbing of the victim with a spear, we did not know. Captives in war were also liable to be put to death by hanging, presumably as a sacrifice to the war god. Procopius, writing in the early 6th century, says of the men of Thule, that is, of Norway and Sweden, the sacrifice most valued is that of the first man which they capture in war. The sacrifice they offer to Ares, since they believe him to be the greatest of the gods. They sacrifice the prisoner not merely by slaughtering him, but by hanging him from a beam, or casting him among thorns, or putting him to death by other horrible methods. Gothic War. And again, in Beowulf, it is noticeable that the king of the Swedes threatens to hang his enemies, the Geats, after the Battle of Ravenswood, some of them on the gallows tree as sport for the birds. An account of a sacrifice to Odin by hanging is given in one of the late sagas, Giltrek's Saga. This has so convincing a ring that in spite of the late date, it may be based on memories of the traditional sacrificial cult of the god. According to this story, a Viking leader, King Vikar, prayed to Odin for a favorable wind, and when lots were drawn to decide who should be given to Odin in return for this, it fell upon the king himself. In this embarrassing situation, his men decided to stage a mock sacrifice. Vikar was to stand on a tree stump with a a calf's intestines looped around his neck and fastened to the tree above. Starkad, a famous hero and follower of Odin, was to stand beside him with a long rod in hand. He thrust out the rod at the king, uttering the words, "Now I give thee to Odin." At this moment, a deadly substitution took place, and the ritual became reality. He let the fur bow go. The rod became a spear and pierced the king through. The stump fell from under his feet, and the calf's intestines became a strong rope, while the branch shot up and lifted the king among the boughs, and there he died. Here noose and spear are used together in a ritual killing. Among the many titles of Odin, it is noticeable that we find Spear Brandisher and the god of the hanged men. Snorri also emphasized the importance attributed to the burning of the dead among the followers of Odin. All objects burned on the pyre with their owners were deemed to pass with them to Valhalla, he tells us. The double ritual of hanging and stabbing is accompanied by burning in the 10th century account of a sacrifice held on the Volga among the Swedish settlers there. It was witnessed by Abin Fadlan, an Arab traveler, who left a detailed account of what he saw. And he tells how a slave girl was sacrificed at the funeral of her master. She was strangled and stabbed at the same time by an old woman called the Angel of Death, and her helpers, and the girl's body was then burned beside that of her master on a great pyre forming of a blazing ship. The importance of the burning is emphasized by the words of one of the bystanders, who as the flames mounted high declared that his lord had sent a wind to bear the dead man to paradise, because of his love for him. This is fully in accord with what Snorri has to say concerning the funeral rites of Odin. The words spoken by Starkad at the sacrifice of King Vikar, "Now I give thee to Odin," are echoed elsewhere. They could be spoken over an enemy host dedicated to the god, as a spear was flung over them. In the Battle of Feirisvellir, fought in 960 between the Swedish king Eric and Styrbjorn the Strong. Eric is said to have performed this rite and to have won the victory with the help of Odin. Styrbjorn, according to the story told in Flateyjarbók, had prayed to Thor for help, but Eric vowed a sacrifice to Odin. Eric dedicated himself to him for victory, offered to die at the end of 10 years. He had already made many sacrifices since he seemed likely to get the worst of it. Not long afterwards, he saw a tall man with a hood over his face. He gave Eric a thin stick and told him to shoot it over the host of Styrbjorn and to say, "Odin has thee all." Now when he had shot it, it appeared to him like a javelin in the air, and it flew over Styrbjorn's host. Immediately blindness fell upon Styrbjorn's men, and then upon Styrbjorn himself. But a great wonder came to pass, for an avalanche broke loose on the mountains, and fell upon Styrbjorn's host, and all the people were slain. This practice of hurling a spear was remembered by the composer of Eyrbyggja Saga. He tells how an Icelander did this over a band of his enemies before a fight, according to ancient custom, to bring them good luck, although it is not mentioned in the poem of the Battle of the Goths and Huns, recorded in late saga, but believed to contain early traditions. There is an allusion to the spear of Odin, which will decide the course of battle. The challenge from the Goths to the Huns ends with this invocation: "May every field of battle be piled with your corpses, and may Odin let the spear fly according to my words." Here the flinging of a spear, like the marking with a spear at the time of death, was attributed to Odin himself. Odin possessed the great spear Gungnir, and this was evidently used to stir up warfare in the world. In Voluspa, the cause of the first war among the gods is said to be brought about by Odin flinging his spear into the host. Thus, up to the end of the heathen period, the picture of the god as fierce provoker of war and giver of victory persisted in the north. Whew, that was a mouthful. I didn't want it to be that long, but it is. So, next Friday, we'll be going over the Germanic war gods. So, stay tuned, and Saturday and Sunday I'll be continuing my Sears Isle playthrough. We're almost finished with it. So that's cool, so stay tuned, and if you want, follow my social media down below.